This is Ken Hans, best storyteller in Texas. Saying of the day, acronyms can create a lot of shortcuts that wind up being the long distance. Acronyms are something that they're used all the time, and there are a few out there that everybody glances at, FYI, for your information. That one's out there. But I'd say 95, 98% of them, they're to a standard industry, and that if you're not in that, you don't know. You don't know what they stand for, and it's confusing. I think back to when I was first state senator, I was meeting with some superintendents, and they kept talking about the LFA, and they had all kinds of acronyms. But the LFA, as a tough thing. I mean, and finally I said, what the hell is a LFA? And they said, that's a local fund assignment. Well, that's how much you're going to have to raise in local property taxes. For the superintendent and the school board, that's a big deal because the state can say, we're cutting your taxes, but make it in position that the taxes have to be raised locally on property taxes. And so that I understood that. So it made more sense. So I started meeting with these superintendents, on the side, not public meetings, and I'd ask them every time they'd bring up an acronym, what does that mean? Explain it to me. So in the debate on the Senate floor, I'd explain it in terms and didn't use any acronyms or anything. So some of the people, some of the press, it got to be I was an expert. Well, I wasn't an expert. I was just trying to make sure that I understood what they were saying. And sometimes it can get a little out of hand. I had some farmers up at Hereford one time. They didn't want radioactive waste stored near their place. And they came up and they called me. They came up with an organization to fight it. They called me. They were upset. And the Secretary of State wouldn't give them a nonprofit organizational charter. And I said, why? They didn't like her name. Well, they can't keep you because they don't like their name. And I said, what's the name? He said, Stop Hauling in Trash. Well, if you look at the initials of that, that's SHIT. I said, I understand why they didn't give you, you can't come up with something that somebody's always trying to come up with something that's pretty clever. But that did not reach the point of being, really clever. And they finally got something else, but it wasn't as sensational. And I think that I had a hard time bargaining on that. I read a deal the other day. This is a good article a guy had. Why you should stop using acronyms right now. First of all, you can alienate some of your new talent. People come in, they feel like an outsider. They don't know what people are talking about. And so they wonder and they feel like they're not part of the organization. And that makes it tough. I think lots of times they think they're lost. Am I dumb or what's going on here? I don't know. It hampers understanding. You got to be concise. You got to be clear. It's got to be simple. And in communication, and going back to my professor, Dr. Davis, said that communication, oral or written, it does not matter that they understand. It's got to be so clear and concise they cannot misunderstand. And that's really good. Also, acronyms for new people and everything will create a situation where it's kind of us versus them. And, you're reading along and you see an acronym and you think, what does that stand for? Federal government's the worst. And the military. I was with some military people when the Reese Air Force Base was in my congressional district. They kept talking about, well, he violated SP. Finally, I said, what's SP? Standard procedure. Well, just say it. You don't have to SP me to death. Just say he violated standard procedure. I understand. And if you're writing it and you said a violation of SP, a guy like me don't stop and say, wonder what that means. And so they assume. And I think this, the old saying, assume, broken down means you make an ass out of you and me. But assume, when you assume everybody, that's an ego problem. You think everybody knows what you know about. I've had people that they talk about issues, and when I was in Congress, I was with a friend of mine, and I was talking to him about some issues that were before Congress are really important, big issues. And we were driving down the road, and he said, pull in this 7-Eleven. I need to get a Dr. Pepper. He was thinking about he needed Dr. Pepper, not what those issues that I was talking about. And I think the coach, Tommy Protho, who coached UCLA, and he had Gary Beeben, and Beeben was one of his best players. And when he was starting, his first time to ever start at the Coliseum against Southern Cal, 100,000 people there. And he noticed during warm-ups that Beeben wasn't blinking, and he was scared. And he went over and told him, he said, Gary, no matter what happens today, there's 1,200,000,000 people in China that don't care. And so you got to get to thinking about that. But it's got to be clear and concise. And acronyms don't help that. They make it very difficult to make it clear and concise. But if you'll pick up a government book or anything, they'll have tons of them in there. You'll be referring back and trying to look it up, see what it is. Just say it. And if it's a long word, National Security Association, and that's 3 different words there. But you start reading it, you don't read it all the way through. You go to the next word. It's fast. But if you say NSA, and you've been dealing with it every time, you'll know. But some won't know, and so that becomes a problem. Acronyms are lazy. They show a lazy side to us, and they are shortcuts that become a long drive. People, they do not take your correspondence serious and your oral communication serious when you have a bunch of acronyms. I can guarantee you that. So get away from that and always read something. Does everyone understand this? If I pass this out, can people understand what I'm saying without asking questions? I had a professor in college. He was a speech professor. Tell them what you're going to tell them, and then tell them what you told them. And maybe they'll remember. 3 shots at them, but do it in a way that keeps them interested. Don't just read the same paragraph 3 times. I think that's so important. One of the big tests, will the whole audience know what that acronym stands for? If they don't, then don't use it. That is a very simple thing to look at. Now, if you're in the military and you've beat it into them, they're going to understand it. But you don't have to use them all. Another thing to look at, will it make it more confusing? And I think that's if it's going to be more confusing, don't use it. And acronyms, I think 90% of the time, make it more confusing. Will it slow down comprehension? Always think of that. Will that slow down comprehension? If it's going to slow down comprehension, don't use it. And do I understand what it means? There are times you'll get to, you'll have to stop and think, now, what does this mean? So if those are good rules of thumb. Somebody sent me a deal the other day about a podcast, and they had SO something. And I said, what does that stand? SEO, Search Engine Optimization. Well, how would I know that? There's absolutely no downside to using the whole 3 words in the example that I used to use, or use all the words. If it's NSA, National Security Administration, and you write it out, they'll read national and part of security, and they're going to the next one. Every organization tries to make something that sounds good. FERC, Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. If you do much practice of law and energy law, you know what that means. But they use a lot of acronyms on federal agencies, whether it's DOD or DOE or HUD or whatever. Those are used so much that people pretty well understand what organization it is, but it still doesn't hurt to write it out and make sure that everybody understands what you're talking about. I saw a deal the other day, somebody sent me on the internet, great pickup lines, and they were the worst. There was one where a guy told the gal in the bar, if you were a booger, I'd pick you first. Now, you're not going to get a lot of women that say, oh, isn't this guy cool, And I've told the story about the girl that worked for me, Lisa Ivy Miller. She's, when she is a young girl, she's still young, but she's probably 40s or 50s now. But she was in her 20s, and she was at a place with some friends, some girlfriends, on 6th Street, and the guy was hitting on her pretty hard. And he said, you need to go home with me. How do you like your eggs in the morning? And she said, not fertilized. And so I thought that was a great comeback. And then they had one of where the guy asked the gal, are you from Tennessee? And she said, no. And he said, well, you're the only 10 I see. Those are lame. I'm always amazed at some of the things that people will come up with that think will get them attention. A guy that uses a line like, if you were a booger, I'd pick you first, he doesn't have any friends because his friends would have told him, don't do that. That's a no, a big no. Don't I know you from somewhere or something? That's kind of lame, but at least it's not vulgar, if it's not, and I guess you could go from there, but I've been out of that business a long time. But it was funny to read that someone thought that was a good idea. And, that's the tombstone where he said his last words were, watch this. It just gets carried away. Stay away from a guy that says, hold my beer and watch this. Don't get too close, because you may be having a tombstone also that didn't work out. At one time near Waco, back in the 1800s, they had a train wreck on purpose. Had two trains run together, and they sold tickets. And the trains were going, and the crowd was watching. A bunch of people got killed. Go watch a train wreck, and let's get up front so we can see it. And then they wind up dying, and so that it didn't work out. We've got a lot of loyal listeners out there. I appreciate you. From time to time, you send in a suggestion. We always enjoy those. If you get somebody to sign up, tell them, go back and start at the first. Or they can stay only. We're talking about, we usually go anywhere from 13 to 25 minutes. I think we've had the Ed Whitaker deal about AT&T went 41 minutes. We went a little overtime on one of the Governor Rick Perry's, but the others have stayed pretty concise, and we try to do that so that you, on Monday morning, you can listen on the way to work and set you a good tone of having a pleasant attitude. To have an attitude of gratitude. A friend of mine used to always say that. Is very important. But today, we're talking about acronyms, and a shortcut with an acronym can be the longest distance many times. Just remember that from Ken Hance, best storyteller in Texas. Have a good week.